is about a woman who's come to England, and she basically doesn't feel like she fits in. She feels that her identity has been stifled, her culture, when she's left the Caribbean, is totally different to living in England. And it's only when this hurricane, which is unusual, arrives in England, and that reminds her of home.
Do you think she learned something at the end?
I was just going to pick up on that actually, because I think you're right. You know, in how she's feeling detached from her culture to a certain degree. But I think the message for me is really underpinned in that final line that the earth is the earth is the earth. And I think it shows us how, no matter how big the world is and no matter where we live, there is
a truth.
A truth.
Yeah, so in that last line, the earth is the earth is the earth, I think she sort of realises that it's not place that's important, it's person, it's you, it's your memories and your identity.
Absolutely, and you can have a strong sense of identity no matter where you live, because you take your culture and your identity with you wherever you go, because it's inside of you. And perhaps place isn't that important, because it's what's inside is your identity and your culture.
And I think in that way it's interesting because it obviously links therefore directly with Search for My Tongue. They have a reawakening in awareness of what happens, and it brings some sort of clarity for them, or hope. But interestingly, in Presents from Layouts in Pakistan, she still doesn't know who she is at the end of the poem. So the journey is incomplete, whereas in Hurricane Hits England, I think that journey is complete.
It's positive, isn't it? And
there's a conclusion in it, isn't there?
Yeah. She repeats that idea, the earth is the earth is the earth, 3 times. The word earth is repeated to show that she's settled, and eventually she's made that transition to this new culture and has adapted to it as well.
I think the language in this poem is very interesting, in particular the use of questions in the poem, the use of the question, tell me why you visit an English coast, reaping havoc in new places.
She asked, who's she asking those questions to, do you think? I mean, she says, talk to me, Hurricane, Hattie and Shango. Do you think she's asking the questions of herself, actually?
I don't know. I don't think she is asking the questions to herself. I think she is asking the questions to nature, to the place that she is, because I think this storm and this hurricane has brought her closer to the landscape, and I think it's brought her to consider how much your environment does actually bear on your own identity. And I think she's developed some kind of a connection with the landscape in this storm.
Yeah, she says that at the beginning, doesn't she, to bring her closer to the landscape.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, some of the images that she uses are really, really effective to describe the power of the storm. She talks about the gathering rage.
I think the personification there is very interesting and very powerful.
I mean, also where she talks about it as being like a dark ancestral spectre, the ancestral aspect being part of her past, part of her history.
Yeah, and I think part of her past, but I think it goes beyond there. It's the history of her culture, isn't it? I think it goes much further for her than just her immediate family. I think we're going back centuries into her ancestral past and her cultural identity.
And finding that identity as well at the end of the poem.
And also she's used the word cousin, so she's related to this hurricane in a sense, that it reminds her of her ancestors and her past and everything that she was comfortable with and what she knew and she could relate to.
I like later on where she talks about the actual effects of the storm, the short-circuiting us, the trees falling heavy as whales. You know, returning to that sort of sea imagery as well, that's similar to describe, you know, these trees crashing to the ground.
It's the power of nature, isn't it? For me, it's oh, why is my heart unchained? That is the real point of this poem for me, because it's how this hurricane can have such a powerful impact on them.
I like how that line stands on its own as well, because for me that shows, from my point of view, that she doesn't feel part of England. She feels very isolated.
Very quickly she can be taken back to a home back in the Caribbean.
Yeah, and now she's trying to adapt, but she just doesn't feel comfortable in this new culture.
I mean, I think that's shown by how at the beginning she's talking about herself in the third person her closer to the landscape. She lay awake. And yet at the end it becomes I am, and she talks about the frozen lake in the eye. I think that's a fantastic image. Come to break the frozen lake in me as a metaphor for her feeling of isolation.
There's a lot of confusion in the poem, I think. There's lots of different feelings, and I think it changes throughout. But I think when it comes to the final stanza, that really, as we've said, does summarise that she is now feeling
and it's
more at home.
But it's a sweet mystery as well. You know, she doesn't know why this has happened, but I don't think that's important. I think it's just the fact that it has happened. So just like in this run, there's sort of this experience that changes her feelings completely. She's never very specific about what it is. She doesn't know why this happens in this room. She says, in Tales Dark, says, I'm wondering. And it's just like hurricane hits England, you know, sweet mystery, but it's happened. It's
And I think it's really interesting as well how it can make her reflect and move her to write such a detailed poem as well. You know, this hurricane has drawn up so many emotions within her, you know, and actually moved her to write this poem.
Yeah, and also it ends on a positive note, which I like, to show that yes, she's had this inner turmoil and this like lack of warmth and feeling that she can adapt to this particular culture, but then in the end, obviously, it ends in a positive note.
Absolutely, I think it's nice as well that she feels that this hurricane has come to let her know something as well.
Giving her a hidden message.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you mentioned about the confused feelings in the poem. I suppose we find a number of oxymorons, like the fearful and reassuring, and other examples of the blinding illumination. You know, this idea of it being so bright that it blinds her.
It also adds to the confusion as well that she's going through, because she can't see an end to what's going on in her life, and then eventually, obviously, she relates to nature, and then she feels very.
I think what's interesting to consider as well is to what extent she does feel at home in England, to what extent she does feel comfortable. Has the move been something that's been positive for her, or is it something that is she wishing and longing to be back home?
I think it's a gradual occurrence for her, that initially she didn't feel happy with her surroundings, and gradually over a period of time then she adapts to a new surroundings. So her identity was unstable at the beginning, but then it becomes more stabilised for her.
But I think it's interesting though to think, how can weather really make you feel more at home?
Well,
I think it's because it's this powerful storm. I mean, the title says hurricane hits in like a newspaper headline, obviously referring back to 1987, the big storm. So it's that really singular event that then prompts this sort of epiphany or realisation.
And also it's an unusual event, because something like that does not happen on a regular basis. In Hurricane Hits England, the structure for me is the second line, second paragraph, or second stanza, where it's got talk to me several times. It's been used. It's like she's desperate to find an answer with what's going on in her life, and how she feels very uncomfortable in her current surroundings.
And then that's picked up with repetition later on of I am and I am and I am, and the earth is the earth is the earth. And the repetition, I suppose, of some of those images, you know, the trees that she talks about several times, and the foundations of the trees within me at the very end.
I think at line 27, oh why is my heart unchained, I think that's an interesting structural point, because that seems to me to underpin what the poem is about for her and what the memory
the turning point. The unchaining of her heart.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's almost a joyful like that.
Yeah, I mean, for your heart to actually be unchained, it's a suggestion that beforehand her heart was chained up, that she couldn't explore a feeling before, that she wasn't feeling back home.
Frozen.
But now this hurricane has unchained that, so now she feels freedom, and perhaps is there a celebration there that she feels ready to explore and really settle in the new home?
Totally agree with you. I think she wants to move on from that point, and there's a definite turning point.
And I I think obviously for structure, the final 2 lines of the poem come to let me know the enjambment there, that the earth is the earth is the earth, is also the heart of the poem, that this hurricane does feel like it's bringing her closer to the land and bringing her closer to a sense of identity in the new surroundings.
Right, okay. My personal views about this poem is, for me, it clearly highlights where the poet is struggling with her identity, where she doesn't feel comfortable initially. However, at the end, everything comes to a neat conclusion, and then she does find her identity, and she does find that wherever she goes, a culture is always going to be with her, and it ends neatly and positive for me in that sense.
I mean, I think it's interesting. I think the poem is interesting because I remember this event that it was based upon. I remember seeing on the news the roofs being torn off the office blocks, going for walks in the country when I was living in Somerset and seeing, the trees uprooted, and it took years and years and years for that damage to be repaired. I mean, it wasn't a real hurricane as such, but it was certainly a very powerful storm. But for me, I would see that storm is personal to her, but I think what she's also talking about is that we all need to find these life-changing moments, this personal realisation of who we are and what we're about, and how once we've done that, we feel free, and it inspires us to move forward and to grow as individuals.
Yeah, I agree. I think the power of a single event to evoke such an emotion within her is very interesting. For me, this poem kind of touches on the idea of how you can feel very comfortable, no matter where you are in the world, if you draw on your cultural identity and cultural references, and okay, it's the weather, but for her, it does evoke a powerful memory for her, and I think that's very interesting.
The weather, that's something that John Agar picks up on in Half Caste, isn't it? One of his powerful images, and of course the two are married. But also, you've got In Search of My Tongue, the dream that she has, that's her moment of realisation. The presence from my aunts in Pakistan, that spurs all this self-reflection.
It also shows as well that for someone's culture it's very, very important to them, and it's difficult to adapt to a new culture moving from another country to somewhere else.
I think we see that in Island Man as well, don't we?
Definitely.
And how important environment is, and
present from my aunts in Pakistan.
I mean, I always think it's interesting to actually compare the two poems by Grace Nichols, because you can do that, even though they're in different clusters. To look at the different ways she essentially explores the same idea, these questions about identity and place in the world.